Well, good morning, everyone. I'll look at my screen and turn my video on for a moment. My name is Patrick Vanderhyde, and I work here at Tableau. Welcome to today's Think Data Thursday. I'm going to turn my video off now because I'm very bashful here. So today we have two Zen masters with us to present at our Think Data Thursday. And I'm really proud to have Chris DeMartini and Tamas Foldi join us today for this presentation. Today we're going to be covering D3.JS and Tableau integration together, and the work that they've done and are going to show off for us today. I know we've had a lot of interest in this Think Data Thursday, so it should be pretty exciting. Let me get a little bit of an intro for Chris. Chris has his video going. Chris DeMartini came to Tableau through his work in network graphing. He's focused in incorporating dynamic aspects to his visualizations and other blogs about these techniques at DataBlick. And I see Anya's on here as well, so welcome Anya from DataBlick. Some of his past works include the likes of jump plots. In fact, he has the jump plot website, and he has done Think Data Thursday about jump plots. Jump plots, hive plots, circular networks, and even family trees. His passions for data analytics and all things Tableau have led him to challenge the notion of whether a visualization technique is possible, and then to prove that it is. In addition to his work at DataBlick, Chris's past experience within the risk and audit profession, and is now focused on data visualization with Visa. Let's see, CTO, we have Tamas, CTO of Star Schema. Tamas, if you wanted to put your video on and show yourself off, you can. Otherwise, I'll let you hide back there. There, Tamas. Tamas is a white hat hacker of Tableau Server. He breaks Tableau Server so you don't have to. His extensive knowledge of Tableau Server and its APIs allows him to manipulate Tableau like no other person. Fortunately, he uses these skills to build and share incredible tips for the server admin community. He strives to help customers and advise Tableau development team on ways that we can improve the products. So there we go. There's Tamas and Chris. Gentlemen, welcome. Welcome this morning, and I'm going to go ahead and Chris, you can just take control of the screen and start sharing your presentation, and I will mute myself. You should be able to hear you. There you go.
Tamas, can you see my screen? Yep, okay. All right. So thanks a lot for the intro, Patrick. I'm going to turn my video off just so I don't get distracted. What we're going to be doing today is going through a couple of integrations that we've done, showing how you can leverage D3.JS within Tableau Server. We're going to go beyond the standard embed that you might have seen in some places where you just take a separate, completely packaged D3 visualizations and put that into your Tableau workbook. And we're going to actually be showing how the two technologies can work together side by side, interacting with one another in a single view. So some of the things that you're going to need to be able to do this is the following here that you see. I'm assuming if you are interested in this technique on server, you probably have already spent all the money you need to by purchasing a server. But once you have that set up, really at the end of the day, all the other pieces that you would need are open source and wouldn't cost you any additional money, which is a good thing. At that point, it's really just about putting some puzzle pieces together, and thanks to people like Tamas, a lot of that work's already been done for you. In terms of how it works, it's pretty straightforward in the layout of where things need to be. Ultimately, you'll want to put a couple of things on your server, and that's where you're going to need to involve workbook developers and maybe even some web developers if needed. You can do a lot of this yourself. You don't really need web developers, as we've shown you here in the examples we're about to go through. Ultimately, you're going to put your Tableau workbook on the Tableau server, and that's just a standard publish that you would do with any other workbook. In addition to that, you will have a set of D3 code, which will have a combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. And those need to be saved to the web server within Tableau Server. And by that, we're really just talking about the web data connector path. As you're building out web data connectors, Tableau Server is actually serving those to you as a web server. So the easiest part of the whole process is how you would go about deploying the Tableau Workbook. The Tableau Workbook will be used for a number of things, some of which I've highlighted here. So first and foremost, you'll need to have a web page object, and that's just your standard embed web page object, which is pointing to an HTML file that you're going to put on your Tableau server like I showed here. And that URL will then be corresponding to where you put that HTML file. And then within your workbook, you can have a number of different things which will help drive the D3 visualization. And so that will be parameters potentially that you have, which can be sent to the JavaScript program in order to set colors or do a number of different things that you can think of. And then also we will be pulling the data, thanks to version 10, straight from Tableau and sourcing that into the D3 chart. When you look at D3.JS, you're really looking at a combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And since we've gone through the easy bit, which is taking a look at how you would go about deploying your Tableau workbook, we can start to get into the rabbit hole that is web development at the end of the day. What we're talking about really is a combination of these three types of files. You can actually combine all of this into one HTML file, although that does get kind of big and hard to manage. So ultimately, you're going to be looking at your HTML file to contain your base containers and DOM elements. Your CSS file will have your various styling attributes that you need. You can leverage readily available CSS libraries like Bootstrap, which is one of my favorites. And then lastly, your JavaScript files, where all the programming will happen that enables the interaction between D3 and Tableau. There's a bunch of examples on D3.JS.org. So here's that website, and this is, of course, created by Mike Bostock, who created D3. There's some really pretty amazing examples of how to do things in D3 here, and he has an example of how it works on top and then the code below. Do pay attention to the licensing that he's applied to all of these code snippets if you're looking to use something like this for work. But a number of really amazing visualizations are available, and through this integration, you can start to leverage those within Tableau. So at this point, this all sounds great and everything, but why would you go through doing this? Why do you want to take on the effort of building out HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files? What's the purpose of it? How does it help what you're doing today? And really, what we're talking about here is, while it does require more code, you can see just from the example I went through, for one case, that things like web animation are already available to you. That animation that I showed you would work just as well on Tableau Server as it did on the web page that I showed you. In addition, you can use other libraries, things like Bootstrap and various open source and readily available things to create things like modal windows, Viz and a Viz, all sorts of types of features that you might want to add into your visualization. In addition to that, D3 has some enhanced customization capabilities beyond what you'd be able to do within Tableau. And the catch here, there's always a catch. The catch here is that you have to, one, be able to put the files on your Tableau server, but also with things like D3, you have to write the code that will allow you to create these advanced visualizations and/or functionality and feature sets. So at this point, we're going to go through a couple of examples that Tamas and I have built out. The first one is a visualization that we posted back before Tableau conference. And really what this was meant to do is Tamas had done a bunch of work to kind of set the groundwork for being able to do this. And what we wanted to do was show that you can leverage this technique to create engaging visualizations, and you can have the two pieces of technology, being Tableau and D3, working together, talking to one another, and all embedded in one view directly on Tableau Server. So as we look at this visualization, you can see that we have a Tableau workbook. I'm on Tableau Server, and this is just a standard Tableau workbook that you may have seen of mine before. And pieces attached to it are, for example, this modal window here. And this is actually a tabbed tooltip that has a D3 visualization within it and a Tableau matrix in it as well. So you can switch in between your D3 visualization and your Tableau matrix. And this isn't just something that's on a different site with different data. This is all sourced from the Tableau visualization itself. So as I click through the Tableau visualization, those two things are going to change, and you're going to see different results in that window. So every time I filter or select anything on the Tableau workbook, you're going to see a different reaction in the visualization on the bottom right. Then we went one step further, and we took the D3 visualization. We said, why can't we do another visualization tooltip? And so while we have this modal tooltip type of window here, which is driven off of what you pick in the main view, we also have added a Tableau tooltip within that. So you have a Tableau workbook with a D3 visualization with a Tableau workbook within it. And that's the reason why we decided to call this project Vizception. Reminded me of the movie Inception. One of the things that we wanted to go through today was some of the key pieces that you would need in order to be able to get these two technologies to talk to one another. And D3.JS is really one example of a technology that you could use this methodology with. It's not the only. So as we start to take a look at how we were able to connect the two things, and we can definitely, like I said, thank Tamas and team for showing us the way here. And I'll point out the blog where he does that later in the presentation today. So first things first, what you need to do is start trying to get after the Tableau objects within Tableau Server. And so I have some examples of code here, and what I'm going to do is walk through in the browser how we would go about doing that. And so I've got my visualization here, and I'm going to start trying to get after the Tableau workbook. So what I've done here is I've tried to find the Tableau object. And once you find the Tableau object, you can start drilling into the hierarchy of that. And so I'm going to grab Viz Manager and Vizes. The visualization, and I want to track down to the workbook level. If you look at the Tableau JavaScript API, at the workbook level, you start to have calls available to you, like you can get the name of the workbook, you can identify what parameters the workbook has, and then you can start to drill into what's the active sheet of the workbook and how can we start to manipulate and work with that. And so that's really what we're talking about here at the end of the day is we're going to drill into this, we're going to get the workbook. So again, it doesn't look like much, but if I go to get name now, you'll see that I have the Vizception workbook. That's the name of the workbook that's been published to Tableau Server, of which you're looking at the active sheet, which is Vizception. So if I go now and take my workbook, I can start to drill into my active sheet, and I'm going to just take a couple shortcuts here. So what I've done here is I've actually set that path that I just created to a variable. And so if I were to call this variable now straight, it will call this same path that I wrote before. So just to show you an example of that. So you can see that's the same response I got here. And then I can call get name as well. And you can see I have the same name here. So now that I've got my workbook stored in this simple call, we can start to try to work with the workbook. And now we're really in business. Because at this point, if you take a look through the JavaScript API, you'll be able to see that there's things like not only getting the name of the workbook, but you can also get quite a bit of other information out of the workbook. So one simple example would be to get the active sheet. And so again, it doesn't look like much, but if I go get name, So that's the name of the dashboard that you're looking at, which is right here. These arrays that are getting returned, the reason why they look so cryptic is because we're on a minified version of JavaScript with respect to the Tableau JavaScript API. And so it's returning data in a minified way. You'll be able to see, if you drill into them, things that start to make a lot more sense to you. And so you can see this, for example, as a type of dashboard. So if I were to call, get the sheet type, or whatever the right call is for that, you would be able to see that this is a dashboard. And each of these are various calls that you can make against the active sheet of the workbook. So as we start to work through the various calls and all the things that you can make, you start to kind of scratch your head and think about all the possibilities that are out there and how these two things can interact with one another. So first and foremost, we can talk about the whole idea of parameters. So we can grab our parameter. And again, I've just got this so you don't have to watch me type it all out. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually calling against the same workbook object, and I'm calling all the parameters within the Tableau workbook. So if you were to think about, as you're working with this integration technique, you could potentially have some standard parameters that are required when you're calling a specific visualization. So if you're calling a map or a bar chart or something like that, and you want to have the person who's deploying the Tableau workbook be able to color the bars or be able to set the variable that the bars should be based on, you would be able to do that through a parameter in Tableau. So if you build your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript dynamic enough, you would be able to basically empower any basic Tableau user, any dashboard builder, to add a couple parameters, add a web page object to their view, publish that to server, and take advantage of your packaged D3 code. So within these parameters, you can see here we have, for example, this one's a range, it's an integer, and the name of it is non-zen length. So that's just showing that those are the parameters of the workbook. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, we can take a look at the new call from version 10, which is get underlying data. And so what just happened there is, even though it may not look like much at the moment, but you've actually now pulled all the data behind the view. And you can see I'm using a different function that's been created, and this is one that's actually in our code file, which I'll show you in a minute. And this has the same type of process that we were showing before with this, and basically just continuing on through this to get the active sheet, then get the worksheets, and then picking one of those worksheets. And so some of this we've, as we were working on the development and testing it out, we wanted to make sure that we had it working. So we've got specific calls in there. And so as I go through here, I can grab the underlying data again. And you have to be on the actual frame. That's why I've gotten that error twice. And so here's my underlying data again. And within the underlying data, you can see we have an array. And this is one of the important pieces of information within the underlying data. Here we have the column names. And so the way the data tables return from the Tableau data object is you have one piece of the array that is the column identifiers. And so that's this first array here. You have some other information, and then you have the actual data later on. Thankfully, we don't have to drill through all these minified values. We can just continue to work with the JavaScript API to get access to all those pieces. So for example, if I want to go ahead and get the columns. So at this point, that's returning just the array of 8 columns, which you could see was a piece of this initial array that you were seeing up here. Once we get columns, we can start to get information about the columns. And so we're going to be pulling get field name. So what I've done here is I've called underlying data, and then once that's returned, I'm looking at trying to get columns. And then I have to specify a specific column that I want. And from there, I can go ahead and get the field name. So once you've done this, you can basically get any of the field name values from that underlying data set. And this is all the groundwork that you would need in order to be able to basically extract this information from Tableau Server, pull it into your JavaScript code, manipulate that on the fly, and serve that into the D3 visualization that you're seeing here. So lastly, as we're working through getting the field names and getting the data, we can go ahead and get the data, actually. And so that's what I've done here. With this call, you can see the main difference between the two pieces of code is just this section here where I'm saying, in this case, get the columns and then get a specific field name of a column. In this case, I'm saying, go get me all the data. And if I go back to the initial get underlying data call, you'll see that this is the last piece of that set of array objects. And this is the actual data within the visualization. So this is pulling actual data values from the view that you're seeing. So let's see who this is. So this is between Paul Chapman, cool, and Craig Bloodworth. So from there, we've talked a little bit about getting all the information, setting the calls out, and getting the data back, as well as other things like parameters and filters and so on. What ultimately you're going to need to do once you get that information back, which is what I've alluded to, is you're going to need to work with manipulating that data on the fly in JavaScript. And one example of that being done is Tamas and team have created some reusable functions that we've shared up on our Git, but I'll show you an example of those. And that's these two pieces of code here. They're very small and don't look like much, but they actually are really powerful in what they're able to do. They're able to take that Tableau array that's come back, and they can basically make it a lot simpler for you to work with. What they're doing is they're taking the indexed array on top for get columns, and they're taking the data table that's returned below. They're kind of putting those two things together, and ultimately they make an array object that looks like this. And so this is once you start working on trying to reformat the data as needed to power the D3 visualization, this format will be a lot easier to work with when you get to that point. Once you get the information out of the view, you're then going to be working on manipulating the JSON further as needed. So for example, in this use case where we're showing you this node link diagram that was built by Mike Bostock originally, it anticipates a data file that comes in and has the nodes identified, and then it has a separate array of all the links between those nodes. And so what that means for us is we can't just send it data straight out of the data table. We need to actually work on manipulating that information to get it into this type of format. And so as we're finishing our calls and everything, I've actually cached the data in this one. So we can see, for example, I've reformatted the data into nodes on top and then the links below. And with functions like we're showing here, that helps enable that. So ultimately, we get the information, we put it in the array that I showed you, and then we have another custom array that we built, or not custom array, custom function that we built, which will take that set of information and build the nodes and links data structure out of it. And that's what you're seeing here. And then lastly, with this one, I've went ahead and cached the information in the browser so that when you're selecting different values of the view, it'll work off the cached data set and not requery the whole data as you're going. But then lastly, as you're working through it, you can start to add interactivity between the two. So I talked a little bit about how the two tools are working together. So one aspect of that would be the fact that you're using the data straight out of the Tableau visualization. So whether you're looking at this view, you're looking at this view, or this tooltip that pops up, all of that is ultimately sourced from the same data set behind the Tableau visualization. But you also want to enable things like the interactivity you're seeing as I'm clicking on these various things. And you're also going to want to have, the ability to close the window and change the data that the visualization is based on and get a server error. And just to prove that that works, try it one more time. So as you're enabling these different capabilities, really what we're talking about is just working within the Tableau JavaScript API. And so what that leads us to is building out things like event listeners. And when you're talking about building interactivity on top of the D3 visualization, that's really adding things like on-click events and so on and so forth. So as we mouse over the node, there's an event for mouse over, and that will then trigger showing the Tableau visualization and then also filtering the Tableau visualization to the node that you're on. So we have Tableau telling D3 create this node, and then we have D3 telling Tableau show the visualization for this node. And all throughout that process, the underlying data node value is being passed in between Tableau and D3. And so just to show you an example of what that looks like. So here's ultimately the underlying data call. So you can see it's very similar to what I was showing you in the browser. And then down here is the actual event listener call. And so this is just standard JavaScript API event listener call. I've got a call to the current viz. I'm going to add an event listener to it. I want the event listener to be based on mark selection. And then on that event happening, I want to run the function mark select. On the D3 side of things, you're going to have something like this. And so here's my node creation within D3. And you can see I have a couple calls at the bottom of that to the dot on. And within that, we're going to be using the mouse over event and the mouse out event. So this is where we get back to talking about how much you have to code within D3. Within D3, you can code something on mouse over, but if you don't code a mouse out as well, it'll just stay there and nothing will happen when you move your mouse off of it. And so it's really important to think about, kind of those intricate details when you're creating something in D3. But ultimately on mouse over, I'm going to set the coordinates. And again, here, this is going back to having to program everything. So we have to actually set where we want that pop-up to come up. Once we've done that, we can call to filter. And so this is a Tableau JavaScript API filter of the field tweeter based on the name of the node. And then we're going to transition, which basically gives you that kind of fade in, fade out effect. And so on mouse over in, we're going to set coordinates, we're going to filter, and then we're going to show. On mouse out, we're just going to hide. And so each time you mouse over a new node, you'll see that move, and then you'll see it fade in and out. And so that's the result of those two mouse over and mouse out functions. So one other example that we wanted to go through today is this one. And so what we have here is ultimately the question Tamas and I were trying to answer is, okay, we used the initial thought to build something out that allowed us to integrate between the two technologies. From this point, can we take that thing we built and start to apply it to other use cases? And so the thought here was, can we take the code base and maybe simplify it, strip some things out, do whatever we need to do, and see if we can easily adapt it to another example of a D3 visualization. And so what you're looking at here is a projections visualization that is, again, coded by Mike Bostock. It's readily available online. And as you're looking at this, you can see it cycling through a number of different map projections. And that again, is all coded. I just grabbed that off the example online. But what we have is we have a Tableau workbook with the main thing in the Tableau workbook being a D3 visualization. If you go back to how we go about publishing the workbook, that's just going to be the standard, web page embed. This is pointing to a HTML file on Tamas's server. And we have a couple of parameters. So this parameter will allow you to change whichever projection you want. So I can click through a couple of these. And you can see this kind of adapt and change to all these different options. And so that's one parameter, and that parameter will change the projection of the map, and that's a Tableau parameter. Then here you have another Tableau parameter for coloring. So I can color it by all of these different values. The data is ultimately sourced out of the Tableau workbook. And with each of these changes, we're modifying the core path map. Now, what's the difference between the two implementations? How much more or less code did it take? So one of the big drivers of the amount of code that had to be written for the map example that you're seeing here would be the fact that we didn't have to do a subsequent JavaScript manipulation of the data to fit it into the visualization. So I was able to take the result of the reusable, let me show you here. So you can see all of this code looks pretty much the same as what I showed you from the last example. This code is pretty much exactly the same. And from there, we're going to work with a couple of different functions to call parameter change and update and all of that. The get underlying data is pretty much the same, and the event listener is slightly different because it's being called on a parameter value change versus a mark select. But you can see here the code is much shorter. It's only a couple hundred lines, whereas this code's a bit longer. And that's just because of the extra features and the extra data manipulation that we had to do within it. So that gets us to this result that you see here. We can cycle in and out of the projection transitions. And so that basically just triggered another timer in order to do the projection transition over and over again. So just to recap what was different between the two, we have a much simpler implementation with really only a parameter interactivity available on the map projection. This could be improved, obviously, with some, if we wanted to create mouse overs, for example. Again, we could add another Tableau visualization in the tooltip here as I mouse over various countries and see what the country is. You could have, an entire Tableau dashboard in the tooltip if you really wanted to at that point. You could also see that the overall structure of the code has been reused to facilitate the example. So this isn't necessarily like plugin yet, but at the end of the day, if we spend enough time on it and abstract it enough, it is something that you could put out there in such a way that with specific parameters and configurations done within the Tableau workbook, you would be able to leverage whichever D3 piece of code that you would want to support that. And as I've alluded to a couple times throughout the talk so far today, we have some additional details that are posted online. So I've got Tamas's original blog up here. There's also the Datablick blog that I wrote, which goes through in detail, talks about other specific pieces of code. And I can definitely answer any other questions about the code or details about the code afterwards. I just wanted to show some examples of how that works today. And then lastly, we've put the code up on GitHub as well. So if you want to start getting your hands dirty and trying to get this to work for yourself, you can go grab it from there and work from that. And with that, I am going to say, what else can we do? So we've got pretty good working examples of how things work on server. And I think our friend Tamas has some ideas of what else we could do. And
yes.
Tamas, I found these pictures on Google and I had to just figure out how to get them into my presentation.
I mean, these are the only pictures with me sitting in some stock photo installation. Sure. I would say pretty unusual, but I did it for money, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's a good reason.
So let me share my screen and try to, you just explain what we are doing in detail. So yes, the whole concept is to expand visualization and visport our capabilities without changing any files on the server. So leverage the API without embedding, leverage the JavaScript API without modifying anything on the Tableau server. Actually, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So I would like to add two completion or addition to your speech. The first is that even if D3 is the main use case for this JavaScript API addition, but some people just can't really think out of the box, and they are really required to have Excel export or better underlying data view. And even if you add D3 visualization and Tableau visualization into the same dashboard, sometimes you'd like to see the underlying data in a more sophisticated or more convenient way. And the same method could give you really a chance to access the underlying data and format it differently than the one in the Tableau tabular export. So if I just want to check like who are the ones who are selling arms from Hungary, I can really do in-place search in this new tabular view for the underlying data. And this integrates pretty well to the Tableau server. So this is like a new functionality. This is a really opaque for the, or transparent for the users, for the clients. But still, this is something what we can add to complete the functionality without breaking license terms or support stuff. So that's number one. The second is that is it possible to do the same D3 integration in Tableau Desktop? So for server, it's pretty easy. You have all the APIs. It's JavaScript. You can do whatever you want. But what if you'd like to do the same in Tableau Desktop? What is your option? And the good news that, or depends, I mean, at least it's good for the ones who'd like to leverage Tableau Desktop for D3 integration as well, that we started to build new APIs, which targets not just server, but desktop as well. So our newest, I would say, open source technology can add also functionalities to the Tableau Desktop, not just the Tableau server. So let me open a desktop dashboard and hope that it will work. It's it's still pretty experimental. So what you see on the left is a ugly bar chart written last night in pure JavaScript. So it's not even D3. It's actually done by the good old mathematics and SVG and JavaScript stuff. So that's why it's ugly, but it shows that you can create visualizations from scratch and use it from Tableau. And the fun part that if I unselect something here, then you see it's just also disappears from here. If I uncheck office supplies, it will be also unchecked here in the visualization. And it works also in the opposite. I mean, I hope it will. So if I click also in the office supplies, it also drives the Tableau filter. So what's happening here? The thing is that we built a REST API to Tableau Desktop. So what you see in the background is the web server log, the request logs, which are happening inside the Tableau Desktop application. Just to show, if I just get request URL from this from the Tableau Desktop, I can get information for the click filters, which things are turned on, like off, on, off, which pretty much the same as the category filter. So by web service calls, I can say that give me the quick filter categorical results from the sample superstore datasets for the non-category NK filter or object. And this also opens a whole set of possibilities. I cannot just read the quick filters or the parameter sets, but I can even set them. So if I, let me go back here and try to enable back the technology, which is unchecked right now. Oh, do you hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you, Tamas.
Yes, that's cool because I'm seeing my giant cursor. Ah, okay. My computer is dying for some reasons. But yeah, actually, pretty much that's what I'm trying to put together is a complete framework where your HTML frame can access the visualizations from the desktop, from the current dashboards, and be able to modify from these HTML pages. And whenever you publish these dashboards to server, then all this interactivity will be the same after publication. So that's where all the things are going, and that's where we are. So I think what Ben Lauber told us during the last Tableau conference, that Tableau will work on the integration of D3 or custom visualization into desktop and server. I guess at this point, I mean, my feeling is that the community, us together, can reach this even before Tableau gets there. So that's my personal opinion at the moment. And since my computer died, I can't really show anything else, but I guess you've seen it already, and you can put the rest from your imagination there. So complete interactive integration inside desktop and inside server.
So Patrick, at this point, we could probably open it up to see if anybody has any questions. You know, if people want me to run through, we've got a little bit of time left. I can run through other examples of code. Tamas, in the meantime, could try to revive his computer.
I maybe.
But you know, if people do have questions, we luckily have some time. We could talk through those.
That's great. I can't see the Q&A module, just so I'm gonna have to leave that one to you guys to see if you see any questions in there or in the chat module. I do have that up.
Hey, this is Tracy. Sorry, I'm kind of losing my voice. We do have one question from Rocky. He's trying to implement this on Tableau Server, and he needs to whitelist the HTML file. He doesn't want to do it manually for each file, so he's wondering if there's a way to automate this.
You can create one single HTML file which acts like a proxy. So basically, you need only one single HTML file which acts, which can load external JavaScripts defined as a parameter inside the Tableau dashboard in desktop. So there are a lot of possibilities how you can make this happen. That's option number one. And the second is, if you really like to have, to share a functionality like replace the underlying data source or add Excel download capabilities to your Tableau server, then you can do it in different ways, like adding to the Vizportal JavaScript file. We are also working with Tableau to find some additional standard ways to add customer-initiated functions to the Tableau server, because right now I think that's something which is really missing, like webhooks, custom JavaScripts which loaded by each and every visualizations or additions to the Viz portal, I'm sure that Tableau will implement it in a short period of time. But until that, your JavaScript coders needs to be tricky and leverage some proxy features. And actually, the whole web data connector thing is just bypasses the same domain security policy. So after you were able to bypass that, you can find a way to build your framework which will not really rely on files on Tableau Server. I mean, you can contact me offline and I can show some ways how you can do that.
Tamas and Chris, what's your favorite way to be contacted? Do you prefer email or the Twitter handles, or what do you like to for questions that come up out of this?
I'm fine with either one of those methods, honestly. So if you already follow me on Twitter and just want to ping me on that, or if you want to send an email to my Datablick account, you can do that as well.
Same for me.
Great.
Tamas, there's another question in here in the chat that's kind of for you, but it basically asks for a little more clarification on what you were doing in desktop versus what we did on server. I think it seemed like maybe you were deploying a workbook, but I don't think you were, right? You were just working straight in Tableau desktop that whole time.
So right now we are working on an API. I mean, we are adding our own plugins and modules to Tableau desktop, and one of our plugin is a web service API. So we are building new extensibility features inside desktop. And this was like one of the examples how you can leverage this extensibility API, this web service, like when you create an HTML frame in a Tableau dashboard, how can that HTML frame get information from the dashboard where it was embedded? So this is really, really similar what we did in Tableau Server, but in Tableau Server, everything was managed by iframes in the same Tableau Server and using JavaScript API. Here, the addition that we built an API which is very similar to the JavaScript API as well. Plus, it has also a web server which just injected into the Tableau desktop.
And then there's one other one around. Are you going to be posting anything about this down the road once you get it?
Yes, it's already open source, but I will try to write the whole stuff. So actually, it works right now in the desktop. I would try to reach that state when whatever I'm doing in the desktop after publication, it will work exactly in the same way from the server. I think I'm really close to that one. And when that happens, then I will also publish the way how anyone can do that. And I have to find out, is this stuff crashed my computer or is something else? That's my experimental stuff. I hope it's not, but who knows?
It looks like there's one other Q&A question about how could somebody new to Tableau take advantage of this by Tushar. So the way I would respond to that is if you're brand new to this Tableau experience, really the key pieces you would be doing for this would be to take on the development of the dashboard and putting the various hooks that we discussed into the dashboard so that the corresponding D3 files or whatever, to Thomas's point, it doesn't need to be D3, right? So whatever integration that you're trying to do associated with that. So if you are new to Tableau, but you've got a lot of experience in web development, you might be pretty far along actually, because a lot of the work that you saw today was done outside of Tableau. I actually didn't even open Tableau desktop the whole presentation. So the work is a lot of work to be done with coding and things like that. And Alan, and sorry, Alan just asked a question that made me laugh. So you're going to be working in those areas. Now, if you don't know, not that you don't know, if you're not as experienced with coding in things like JavaScript, then you may need somebody to help you out who has experience in that, or you may need to put some time into picking it up. I was by no means a JavaScript expert when I started this whole process, and just kind of picked it up and went with it as we move forward. And luckily, there's a lot of information now that we've posted that should hopefully help you along the way. So the one and only Alan Walker just asked a question. How do we make what you guys do more drag drop for people that hate coding? That's interesting coming from a coder, Alan. So we could start to abstract this further and further to make it more drag drop if need be. For the time being right now, you can see a lot of the examples that we shared with you are code-based, and we are writing code. There's ways to go about modularizing this so that you could bring elements into your code that are pre-written and ready to go. But I think at this point, the answer to your question is, at least in Tamas can correct me if I'm wrong here, but for the time being, you will need to write a little bit of code to make this work.
Yes, but eventually the goal is to build visualizations in D3 which are reusable. So
right.
You can store the dimensions and measures to be displayed in parameters. So the D3 visualization can read it actually from the dashboard, which means that you have just one, I would say, HTML or one D3 visualization that is generic and can read all the metadata directly from the dashboard where it was embedded, which means that you have one Sankey HTML and can be used across all of your dashboards, which requires that kind of visualization, which is drag and drop, but at least you don't have to code, or not anyone has to code.
And then Alan asked another question around, could we put partner JS files like Mapbox.js on the server the same way?
Of course we can. Oh, of course we can. So why not?
That's the answer to everything, right? We can do whatever, right?
Yes. I mean, that's the goal. So if you can code, there are no boundaries, no limitations. If you think that you need another menu item in desktop, or you need another functionality in desktop, you can code it. If you miss something from the server, like Excel export, you can do it. It's just a question of time and experience, nothing more. And that's why we have this community, because all of us from our free time try to contribute, and that will end up something pretty useful set of tools and applications.
Tamas, as you demonstrated with the export functionality, I noticed that I guess the first thing that came to mind was in our community, in our idea section, there's a couple different ideas that are centered around this ability to customize your export of your crosstabs, and seeing that functionality being built out here was kind of exciting, just to see that much control being built out there was great. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions? No, I'll turn my video back on. So Tamas and Chris, thank you so much for joining us today and coming out for this Think Data Thursday. I wanted to remind people, we get a little ways away from our Tableau conference, and sometimes we forget to mention that I had the pleasure of meeting both of you at Tableau conference, and I know a number of other people did as well. At conference in our community area, there's the picture that we keep up on our community picture there shows us from conference. We have an area where the Zen masters come, and you as Tableau customers who are attending conference can get together and meet with them one-on-one, and both Chris and Tamas spent some time there and helped people out. If you want to get to know these folks and ask them some questions there as well, I urge you to come to conference and come over and check out our Zen Master time in the community. So I thought I'd throw a little plug in for that, because it's always a great opportunity to get to know you guys in person. And with that, I think that's it. as long as we have Tracy on here. Tracy, do we have a Think Data Thursday going yet for next month? I think we were going to focus on a women's Think Data Thursday next month, and I haven't heard if we had anything yet or not.
No, not yet.
Okay. So if we have any presenters, especially female presenters for March that are interested, have a topic they'd like to share, please get a hold of Tracy or I. Just send an email to the community@tableau.com email address. We'd love to have some presenters for next month, and that's it. So again, thank you very much, everyone. And with that, I think I'll go ahead and shut it down.